The scope is reusable. It's designed in such a way that it is impossible to fully clean. If a scope is used in a patient has a superbug, and then it's reused on you, even if you follow the instructions for you to the T as a provider, those scopes are still not clean, and that superbug gets transferred into the next patient, which could be you.
I'm not going to the doctor ever again.
We are back on the Jon and Marc podcast with, Marc just let me know, our first ever recurring guest. Other than Joe Fantini, who joins us every week, Kelsey Stokes is back to talk about the next new litigation. The last time she was on, she talked about Hernia Mesh, and that was one of our most viewed episodes, as I told you before we started. I think not just because you did a fantastic job explaining litigation, which I know you're going to do today, talking about Olympus Scopes, but because the things that you talk about are so relevant not only to the attorneys who are looking at these cases, but the people who are potentially affected by these problems with these medical devices. So thank you again for joining us.
Well, I'm so happy you guys had me back. It was so much fun last time, so I'm thrilled to be here. Always enjoy talking to you guys.
Thank you, thank you. And you're now officially with?
The Lanier Law Firm. I'm very happy. It is a fantastic firm. I cannot stress enough the level of professionalism from the top down. It is just such a great place to work. It is such a great place to practice law. So I'm very, very happy.
Yes, when we found out from the Lanier team that you were joining, Jen and I were talking, and we were very pleasantly surprised to hear that you were joining the team.
Yeah, I'm very happy about it, and you know, Marc is so genuine. I mean, and that trickles down. I can't stress enough, like the level of compassion that Marc has and all of the attorneys at Lanier have for the clients. It's incomparable to any other firm, frankly, and I'm not just saying that. I mean, it's amazing.
All right, one quick thing before we get into this episode. Jon and I are going to be at Mass Tort Puerto Rico. And I'm not saying that their 5th anniversary is the year to go, but I am heavily implying it. It's a milestone year, and the event has real momentum. And we'll be there recording episodes of the Jon and Marc podcast as the official podcast sponsor of Mass Torts Puerto Rico. So if you've been debating it, stop being weird and just buy a ticket. Join Jon and I May 5th through 7th in beautiful San Juan at Mass Torts Puerto Rico. Get all the info and register at masstortsportorico.com. Back to the show.
The first new litigation that you are working on at Lanier is one that you just got off stage talking about at MTMP. Straight from the stage up to the studio, we are talking about Olympus Scopes. So for those who are not in the audience and are not yet aware of what this litigation actually is, can you just give like the high-level overview, and then we'll get into some of the details about the case?
So Olympus, first of all, is the #1 manufacturer of endoscopes. Endoscopes is the broad term for, there's more specific scopes, but if you have ever had the pleasant experience of, for example, having a colonoscopy, then you would have encountered a scope. That particular scope is called a colonoscope because it's used in a colonoscopy. There's also duodenoscopes used in a procedure called ERCP. There's bronchoscopes used in the procedures where they actually scope the lungs. There's the upper GI, they're called gastroscopes, and that's for upper endoscopies. So whenever the esophagus is looked at, those are the 4 main scopes that we are looking at for this litigation. And what's very important to know about them is that they are reusable. This litigation has an ick factor like no other.
Yeah, I know. When we started learning about it, and it like peeling back the layers and really understanding what happened, it is.
It's gross.
Yes.
I mean, it will make you rethink what you thought was a routine procedure, a routine, hey, it's just that time, it's that age. You will never feel the same about it again. So let me tell you about the numbers. Numbers-wise, Olympus, and this is Olympus's own data, okay? This is not something that we've tried to generate from various sources. This is Olympus saying this. There's about 30 million procedures a year that utilize this Olympus, the reusable scope, okay? And the complications that are seen, they happen at a rate that is frankly unacceptable, that when you break it down, even conservatively, the complications that we're seeing happen about 30,000 of these cases per year.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. It is a lot. It's an unacceptable number. And to be clear, these are not patients that are going in because they have some, significant issue and they're having a surgery. With the surgery is a scope that's going down, and so you've got a patient who's open. No, these are routine, what you think are just no complications at all type procedure, that these are happening in, these complications. What's happening, you might be wondering. Okay, well, the scope, again, is reusable, and it's designed in such a way that it is impossible to clean, to fully clean. And so what happens is if a scope is used in a patient who, let's say, has a superbug or multi-drug resistant organism inside of them, and then it's reused on you, because of the fact that it was impossible to clean, even if you follow the instructions for use, that's the little pamphlet that comes with every device, if you follow those instructions to the T as a provider, those scopes are still not clean, and that superbug gets transferred into the next patient, which could be you, and that's disturbing.
I'm not going to the doctor ever again. Colonoscopy is off the table for me.
I know.
There's no sheath that goes on top that they use to ensure that it's completely clean?
You would think that. And they absolutely could do that. And so there are ways to make these scopes safer, but they have chosen not to. As is typical unfortunately, with so many of these companies, is they choose profits over patients, profits over safety. Classic story.
I'm understanding how you get potentially the injury. Your scope is used inside somebody, not fully clean, used again inside somebody, stuff could get transferred, you'd say. What are the injuries that we're seeing or the complications that have been arising, 30,000 of them a year?
Sure. So the number one, the most predominant one, are these superbugs, these infections. And what we're seeing, and we've talked to several experts in the field. We have an infectious disease doc who we talk to regularly to help guide us on, what is a case, what is not a case. And what the literature says is the latency period for these infections could be a fairly extended amount of time. But what's really critical is from the time of the scope procedure to the onset of the infection, which happens fairly quickly, is about 2 weeks and about up to 30 days. So that's your window of time. It can onset as quickly as the next day. And what happens is that these bugs are so resistant to drugs, to any sort of antibiotic, that they enter the system, notwithstanding, IV antibiotics, hospitalization. What happens is the body goes septic and then the organs start to fail. So that's one of the most common things that we're seeing. And we were actually alerted to this by our expert who looks at medical device reports or adverse event reports. And the expert was seeing this very significant pattern. And what's interesting about this is that this company has been dinged by the FDA multiple times. There's actually been a criminal prosecution against the heads of the company because they have failed to report the adverse events. And even though they have major issues in reporting adverse events, there's still a significant pattern that we're seeing.
Getting an actual criminal investigation almost never happens in this world.
That is correct.
You have to do some obscene or heinous things to really garner that attention.
That is correct.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Has Olympus made any statements at all about their stance on yes, these are clean, these infections may or may not have been caused by the scopes?
Olympus always, categorically denies any sort of wrongdoing, as most companies do. But interestingly, FDA ordered them to do a study. So they did a 522 study where they had an expert in reprocessing or cleaning these devices follow the instructions for use, to the T, perfectly, using the Olympus reprocessors. So Olympus also makes the cleaning device in many of these cases. And about 60% of the time, they stopped and they looked at whether or not these things were clean in multiple steps. And in each step, there was a failing rate. And that is even when you follow the instructions to the T. Their own study, I think that was in 2018, it was around that time. So they have been on notice of these issues for years.
Wow.
You said 2018?
I believe it was 2018.
So 8 years.
Yeah.
At least. That was when FDA said, okay, you have to do a study.
I'm not good at math. 8 years and 30.
240,000.
Yes, 240,000 potential people.
Right.
Michigan education coming in right there.
Yeah, and you asked about injuries. Yeah. That was actually fast math. I'm very impressed. So you asked about injuries. The superbug is one. The other thing that we're seeing in the literature is on these bronchoscopes. If somebody has tuberculosis, basically, think about this. They take the tuberculosis patient, they scope him, and then because these things can't be cleaned, they insert them into another patient, and they're just taking this tuberculosis and putting it right into the next patient. There's even literature that reports this has happened with HIV infections, which is just awful. You're speechless, right?
Yeah, it's
The rage and frustration I would have if I got sick from my medical provider giving me a virus or bacteria from a piece of medical equipment. I'm going for a routine procedure. Preventative
Right.
procedure. And then I'm in the hospital getting IV antibiotics, fighting for my life. What's the first rule? Do no harm?
Right, exactly. These are routine procedures, and these are done in otherwise healthy people. Yeah. And to be clear, our ID expert says that these superbugs, that you don't just get them, a normal patient, otherwise healthy, even with some comorbidities here and there, off the street, you do not have one of these superbugs. So the only way, unless there's some exceptions, for example, like dialysis patients, they're constantly in a hospital environment, they already have a compromised system. Mm-hmm. So maybe a patient like that, but very rarely are you going to have these routine procedures where a patient is hosting a superbug. And so when you go in, and the only thing that has happened to you from the time you get this nasty infection is the scope procedure, what else could it be, right?
Are you seeing that it's the types of infections or bacteria that specifically live outside of the body for extended periods of time that are recurring?
So the key, this is for the lawyers who are looking at these cases, the key is you want to make sure that it's a gram-negative bacteria, because those are the ones that are not just off the street. So for the staph and things like that, where staph is just on everybody's skin.
I can just touch you. If I have it, you get it.
Right, exactly. And so what you're looking for when you're looking at these cases is a gram-negative. The other type of injury that we're seeing, I will tell you about this, but I also want to caution lawyers who are looking at these cases, is perforation cases. So what is happening, because, and this is a topic near and dear to my heart, polymers, right? Because
you sure do love polymers.
Hernia Mesh queen, is that because this reprocessing happens over and over and over again, that the polymer itself actually breaks down. And so what we've seen in the adverse event reports, as well as clients who call us, is that during the procedure itself, the device falls apart. It starts to essentially shed plastic, and that can pierce the bowel. That is an injury to be aware of. The caution, though, here's a major caution, is be very careful about how you advertise and put that messaging out, because what happens is that the patients who maybe had a perforation because a doc made a mistake or something slipped and then the scope itself perfed the bowel, you might get those cases. Those are not cases we're pursuing, just because there's an issue with, okay, that's not really the scope's fault, that's the doc's fault, right? So just be careful on that, but that is absolutely something we're seeing in the adverse events. It's a injury that we are investigating, and we believe will be part of the consolidated action.
This is something that could potentially affect anyone. Are you seeing it more in certain cohorts of patients, men, women, ages?
So gender doesn't seem to matter. other than just the type of procedure that might be more common for certain genders. Age only, what we're seeing is just because as you reach that age of 45 and above, you start to get these routine procedures just to make sure everything's, going okay. And so that's where the age comes into play. But as far as susceptibility to it, even children can get this, which is really disturbing. So if let's say your 5-year-old is having some GI issues, the GI doc just wants to do a scope procedure to make sure there's nothing going on, that 5-year-old is just as susceptible as the 45-year-old.
Gotcha. The age breakdown, it just pretty much correlates to the amount of people getting scopes.
Right, exactly.
For people who are listening, who are not lawyers, who want to avoid this issue, what is their alternative, knowing that they need to get the colonoscopy, right? I turned 44 2 days ago. 45 is coming up real quick, right? I have to get a colonoscopy soon. I can't tell my doctor, hey, don't order a lab with an Olympus scope, right? It's so prevalent. What are the alternatives?
So there are disposable scopes. So number one, a disposable scope is one way. Also, the other thing that needs to happen is that providers need to be made aware of this issue. And so not only is this a design defect case, but this is a failure to warn case as well, because the providers are not made aware of the fact that even if you use Olympus's reprocessor, even if you follow the instructions to a T, there are things that you need to do to ensure that you're not transmitting into otherwise healthy patients. So for example, doctors need to be warned that if they're using a scope on a patient with HIV, that scope should be thrown away. If they're using it on a patient who clearly has some issues, with maybe they're more susceptible to MDROs or superbugs, that should be thrown away. So there are things that can be done, and the answer to your question is one that I know that Olympus is going to be fighting us tooth and nail on, and so we're prepared to bring experts forth, talk about all of the ways that these could be made safe.
Usually when these types of new cases come out, right, attorneys are looking at what is the best way for me to find these cases in my existing client portfolio, right? Knowing now that I'm just going to say generally skews like middle age and up, right, with some edge cases. Knowing that the gender really doesn't make a difference, though I would say probably skews more male because of the colonoscopies. What do you feel like should be done to acquire these types of cases if you're like a local or regional personal injury firm?
Well, this is one of those cases where I think you can go any medium. You can do the social media route. You could do television advertising. Really, any medium is going to capture the attention, I think, of somebody who had a scope procedure and then landed in the hospital for weeks, sometimes at a time, organ failure. And in sad cases, we've had several actual, just deaths where scope procedure and then these patients die within days to weeks of the scope procedure. So it's really just whatever, talk to you guys, for example, and figure out what makes the most financial sense as far as getting the message out. Because that's what this is about, right? I mean, there's so much criticism from the defense side about attorney advertising, but if it weren't for
How would you
us,
know?
Exactly. These are true health crises, and if it weren't for the plaintiff's bar getting this messaging out through entities like you guys, then these patients wouldn't be the wiser, because the providers, the doctors, they don't know either. I mean, don't forget, these doctors and these providers, these hospitals, they're victims too of the manufacturer failing to tell them what the manufacturer clearly knows and is on notice of. So get the word out, because patients need to be aware that this is a real issue and a real health crisis, frankly.
Do you think you're going to run into the same issue, like harking back to the hernia mesh days, where people are like, I was affected by this, but I have no idea which manufacturer it was? Or is it Olympus Scopes is so common that the odds are if they got a scope procedure, it was probably Olympus?
First one, 100%, nobody knows what scope they're getting, okay? You're gonna have to get the medical records. When we were first looking at these cases, we've been looking at this case on the better part of a year now, okay? Studying it, looking at the records, we were really concerned that product ID was not going to be as obvious, right? Because it's not an implant. It's not something where here's a surgical sticker that was, stuck on the record, and this was the device that is in you. But it turns out in these procedures, usually it's actually quite clear. Sometimes it's in big bold, it just says Olympus. So the next part of your question is, yes, about 85% or higher of the time, it is going to be one of these Olympus scopes.
They have a camera in them, right? That's the whole
Yes.
concept. So probably in the picture it says like taken by this model or by Olympus or something.
Right, there's actually several places in the medical records that you can find it. The procedure note itself is probably the best place. This is the very same Olympus that makes cameras. Fuji's also a player.
The same one that makes cameras. It
Yes!
just clicked for me just right now. I just thought it was some.
Just a coincidence. No, this is actually kind of what they've gone to.
For those who don't know, in the marketing world, product liability cases for medical devices are like the hardest, not the hardest, but very difficult for us because no one knows what they have inside them.
That's right. Right. Well, they are because when a client calls up, they just know they've had a scope procedure. They know that within days or weeks of that scope procedure, they were hospitalized, and then you have to go and do the legwork. Just like any of these cases, these cases are not for the faint of heart. You actually have to do the work, and just going back to, let me just plug the Lanier law firm. We actually order the medical records, we do the legwork, we get the records on the front end, and that is so key because you have to know what you have. And the other thing is the injury records. You have to have all of that, and sometimes it's an extensive hospitalization. So while we always ask the clients, because the clients can get the records the fastest, hey, try to help us, try to go on the MyChart. Always excellent if the client, potential plaintiff comes in with the medical records so we can quickly investigate it. But if not, if for whatever reason they can't, we're going to do that legwork.
Which is why, if you do come upon one of these cases, there's no one better to send those cases to than Kelsey, who, working with David Hobbs on this case, right, would be reviewing these. I will tell you that your comments about the firm and their professionalism, their care for clients, permeate through the entire organization. Attorneys who refer cases into the firm work directly with Dwana, who runs intake to make sure that any of the cases that are being sent over are the correct cases. They're working on communication with the clients collaboratively. Like, you guys do a really great job at that.
Oh yeah, our intake department ran by Dwana is fantastic. I can't speak highly enough about them. And David Hobbs, of course, who has been my partner in crime for over a decade, and we've worked hand in hand. He is a client whisperer. I can't tell you, it's like he is on the phone so much with clients, and they feel cared about. I can't speak highly enough of David Hobbs.
Because they are.
They are. They absolutely are.
I think, going back to the attorneys in their local markets who may be able to activate their existing client audiences, I think, just the fact that this is such a widely used procedure and item, that really sending out an email to your email newsletter list, like with just an alert, right? Like, mention the fact that Kelsey literally today was talking about this in front of a room full of attorneys, is actively investigating it. It's not consolidated yet, right? But it's on its path to being consolidated, that your clients need to be aware that this is going on. And if they had a scope, or one of their family members had a scope, and it led to one of these hospitalizations, that more than likely, right, 85 to 90% chance that there is some sort of a correlation there with the procedure that they had, and they should reach out to your firm, and then your firm should then reach out to you and investigate the claim, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up an excellent point. We were thinking about what type of overlap in clients that we've represented previously, or that many of the people watching have represented. And if you think about it, any time like Zantac, where there were issues with the esophagus, most of those people had a scope procedure done. Hernia Mesh, they had bowel issues, and so in many instances, before they realized that it was the mesh, maybe they had a colonoscopy done. And so look at your case, the cases that you have worked on previously, and think about, is there an overlap in patients who may have had a scope procedure as part of just kind of trying to diagnose other things?
Real quick update, just because we're 6 months since our last conversation, can you give everybody an update on where we are currently at with Hernia Mesh?
I feel like any stage I am on, I have to touch on Hernia Mesh, and I'm glad to do it. I think I'll be working on Hernia Mesh well into. My kids will be probably graduated from college. As many know, we reached a global deal with BARD. BARD has been, we have worked closely with BARD and making this deal work. Payments have been going out. The traditional pay cases are going to be receiving offers. It is going well. It is, I'm administering counsel of that, and my co-administering counsel, Mike Russo, is phenomenal to work with. And then, of course, the special masters, Ellen Reisman, John Jackson, Adrian Teese, Doug Schreiner. All have been fantastic. I have a case in the District of Massachusetts that's coming up that we're trying a case against a different defendant in July, so we're looking forward to that. If you have any questions about Hernia Mesh, please reach out to me. I know the ins and outs of it, and so it's such a broad question. I feel like I did not do it justice, but just reach out to me.
That's a good update. Yeah. Also, for those listening or watching, if you're like, hey, Kelsey, when am I going to get my money? That's a great question. You should watch our episode with Gary from Archer that we recently released on the channel about the mass tort settlement process and getting funds distributed.
Yeah.
It is a long process.
It is a long process. There's the whole long process of litigation. Yeah. And then what plaintiffs need to be made aware of is that the settlement process itself then takes a significant amount of time, especially when the agreement actually contemplates a longer amount of time. And so, please be patient. It's a process. And as you mentioned, speaking of Archer, the lien resolution process, just so everybody knows, there is a subrogation right in every single private insurer's contract. So there's a contractual right to subrogation for treatment that was related and it was the fault of another party. And then there's an actual statute that Medicare is entitled to recover. So we have to check those boxes in order to make sure that all of us, including the plaintiff, including our clients, don't get in trouble for not following the law.
I'm not going to ask you about the super secret things that you are investigating. We'll talk about that in 6 months. We'll see what the next thing is. But for right now, the topic of the moment is Olympus Scopes. Everybody who's watching this should be aware, whether you are someone who is potentially affected by this or a law firm seeking to make your clients aware about this, there's no better resource than Kelsey and David at Lanier to talk to this about. Thank you so much once again for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun, and I can't wait to come on.
I want to keep this tradition rolling. I'll see you every 6 months for whatever the next update is. For those who have questions, lawyers that either have questions about the case or want to refer you cases, what's the best email now that you have a new email?
Kelsey.stokes@lanierlawfirm.com. So that's KELSEY.STOKES@lanierlawfirm.com.
Awesome. Thank you again, Kelsey.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we'll see you at the next MTMP.
Excellent. Looking forward to it. For anybody who is watching, do not forget to like and subscribe to the Jon and Marc podcast. They are a must-see.